Hi, everybody. This is Achyuta Baba from Nightlight Astrology. It is Friday, December 27th today, and we're going to take a look at the Sun's conjunction with Jupiter. This is also referred to as a special condition called Cazimi, and this means that the planet is at the heart of the Sun, that the planet Jupiter in this case is at the exact same degree down to the same minute as the Sun. And we're going to talk about what that means and in general, and then specifically what it means with regard to the Sun and Jupiter today. Jupiter in Capricorn, right after solar eclipse as well, right? So that's our agenda for today. Now, before I dive in, I want to remind you that we are in the home stretch of my annual Kickstarter. I have 520 backers now, with 4 days left to go. Thank you, everybody, for your show of support. I really appreciate it. And I still have 4 days left. If you want to pick up a reward reading, pitch in. The last stretch goal is 550 backers. We have 30 more to go in 4 days. I think we can get there. That would be over 130 more backers than we gained last year, which is phenomenal. We've just broken all of our records, and we're just going to keep going and do as much as we can before the end of the year. Remember that you can pick up 50% off tuition to all of my programs in 2020. That's my Ancient Astrology for the Modern Mystic 1-year certification course that begins in June and November of 2020. My Year 2 program, which begins in June if you're already enrolled or have already taken one of my courses, and my Horary Astrology course begins in June. Those are all 1-year certification classes. So pick those up while you can. You got 4 days left to take advantage of that. And then you can pick up a reward reading as well. I'm going to be capping those readings pretty soon to make sure that I'm not just doing readings for the rest of 2020, because there's quite a few of them piling up now. So pick up a reward reading while you can. And thank you again for your support. If you appreciate this work, if you tune into it regularly, you share, you subscribe, you like, thank you for that as well. Even just your prayers are really meaningful to me. I'm just trying to build as much momentum into the creation of really good content in 2020 and be able to support myself and make a living doing what I do. So thank you. All right, now let's talk about Jupiter and the Sun's conjunction. Now, Jupiter and the Sun's conjunction happens, it's the start of what we call a synodic cycle. And every planet has a synodic cycle with the Sun, which means it goes through a period where the two planets are conjoined, and then the planet will go through a full cycle with the Sun. Mercury and Venus look a little bit different than Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. But the Moon, of course, has its own cycle with the Sun as well. The cycle of Jupiter is a superior planet, so it goes through the full, all of the full cycle, just like the Moon does. It goes through a conjunction, a square, an opposition, a last quarter square, and back to a conjunction. And when the Sun eclipses any superior planet, the superior planets again being Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, they move slower than the Sun, hence they're called superior. And when that conjunction happens, it's a death and rebirth, you could say, that's taking place within the cycle. Now, we get really nuanced and detailed with the cycles of all of the planets with the Sun. I'm just going to keep it simple to say that, keep it simple for today and say that this is a rebirthing moment for the Sun and Jupiter. Jupiter has been going through a phase of dying and being reborn as the Sun has come to within about 15 degrees of Jupiter, swallowing its light. It becomes invisible in the sky. It's said to be burnt up, consumed, weakened, like it's dying. And then it's an old Jupiter, and then the conjunction takes place. It's a birth. It's a rebirth. As the Sun separates from Jupiter very gradually, you're going to see Jupiter appear in the morning sky as a morning star, and that'll happen in the next month, let's say, next couple of weeks to a month. So the moment when any planet comes into the exact same degree as the Sun in the zodiac, the planet is said to be Cazimi, which means that it's at the heart of the Sun, and it's considered to be greatly empowered. It has the mark of the king. Like if you're a foreign diplomat and you have the seal of the king, you have the ability to make decisions or negotiate on behalf of the king. Or you may carry a message on behalf of the king or the queen. And so to this extent, the planet that's Cazimi becomes greatly empowered by the authority of the Sun. And the Sun plays this central role in ancient astrology as the planet that is emblematic of eternity, of the spirit, the soul, the self, the essence of all things. And so Jupiter is in a greatly empowered stage right now, coming just shortly after a solar eclipse in the sign of Capricorn that was conjoined with the sun and the moon. That eclipse happened just after midnight on Christmas Eve here, or Christmas here on the East Coast, a Christmas Day evening on the West Coast. And what this means is that there's a very overall, it kind of just doubles down on this idea that there's a very strong sense of a new beginning that's being forged right now around Jupiterian symbolism and Capricornian symbolism at the same time. So that's a kind of Jupiter-Saturn convergence. And we know that by December of 2020, on the solstice of 2020, Jupiter and Saturn will be conjoined in Saturn's sign of Aquarius. So today's Cazimi is almost like just an extended symbol of the seed that's being planted right now, or an empowerment around Jupiterian themes, but Jupiter with a strong dose of Saturn. So that's what we have to interpret. That's what we're going to interpret today. All right, so what does that mean? Okay, well, first of all, let's focus on what it means that Jupiter is invisible. I did an I Ching reading this morning. Some of you know that I work with the I Ching pretty regularly as a way of centering myself when I write my daily horoscopes. I've written about them for many years and often incorporate them into my written work. But I've decided that I might start throwing them into some of my recordings a little bit in the year ahead, because sometimes they just add something really nice. The I Ching, for those of you who don't know, is an ancient Chinese oracle. It was like astrology. It was first a cosmology that then turns into a prognosticating or oracular device, a mantic device. And the I Ching is comprised of 64 different six-lined figures, sometimes called hexagrams, so the six quality. And they are figures that are made up of broken and solid lines, the broken lines being yin, the solid being yang. And each of the different 64 hexagrams in the sequence will be, it contains a set of teachings about the way that energy moves and flows here in our material reality on Earth. And each hexagram also can shift or change. One line or two lines or three lines can shift or change and create a second hexagram. So when you're doing a reading, you're usually pulling one or two hexagrams along with one particular line of one hexagram that is changed to form a second hexagram. And they all have teachings associated with them. So oftentimes in the morning before I prepare my work, for example, as some of you know, I have quite a morning routine that goes into preparing whatever I'm making for the day. I will sit down with the I Ching and I will draw a hexagram. Sometimes two hexagrams come back as a way of helping me continue to deepen my meditation on whatever I'm going to talk about for the day, and whatever angle of the transit is maybe most worthy of my attention for that day. So there's always lots to choose from. So this morning I drew asking the question, what's the meaning of today's Sun-Jupiter Cazimi? What does it mean that Jupiter's at the heart of the sun, that Jupiter's being reborn right now, especially right after that solar eclipse with Jupiter, really emphasizing the newness? What's this mean? What can we take away from this? Us in general. The first hexagram that came back is number 15. I'm not going to give you the Chinese names because I will slaughter the pronunciations, but the 15th hexagram is a hexagram that refers to modesty. Really, really beautiful teaching about modesty. The changing line was the very first line of the hexagram, transforming into the 36th hexagram, which is sometimes called eclipsing the light. The first hexagram, the line 1 of hexagram 15, modesty, reads this. The superior person, which is a phrase that the I Ching uses to refer to the sage, right? Which we're all trying to be when we study the I Ching. We're all trying to become more like the sage of steady heart and steady mind. The superior person is modest about his or her modesty, and thus may cross to the far shore good fortune. So why would this come back as the teaching or the lesson in relation to Jupiter at the heart of the sun? Okay, very simply, Jupiter is about bigness. Jupiter is a planet that you ask anyone, who knows anything about astrology on the street, like if you have the Dave Letterman show or whatever it is, where he goes out on the street and asks stupid questions and nobody can get them right. The few questions, someone always gets one right. Ask anyone on the street knows anything about astrology. What does Jupiter mean? And they'll go, expansion. So that's a very basic thing that Jupiter indicates is growth, expansion, making something big. When you put Jupiter and the sun together, one of the perennial temptations is about something that is noble, bright, good, and true being magnified or made really big, put on display for everyone. But the I Ching's hexagram read for the day, modesty, and then line 1, being modest about modesty. If you're modest about modesty, you cross to the far shore, meaning you can accomplish what you set out to accomplish, and there's good fortune. What does this teaching mean for us? It means that though there is an empowered sense of what's possible right now, a long-term dream or vision, which often comes about when the sun, which is traditionally associated with the breath of life that pushes and moves all things. The sun is associated with the primary motion of the sky, which is the generative life motion of all of the cosmos in the ancient metaphysics. And so the sun wants to compel motion. And when it's joined with the moon, which represents the seed ground of our material environments, it's seeding a new action or seeding new motion. It's breathing life into something, compelling motion, something to unfold, unwind, and take place. It's a cycle, so it's taking place over a long period of time that's to come. This is the meaning of an eclipse: changing circumstances, newness, life, breath, change. So when you place it with Jupiter, Jupiter wants to magnify it, make it big, add to it a sense of virtue, or ennoble it, or make it even brighter. Jupiter in Capricorn is in its fall, and Jupiter right now is invisible behind the beams of the sun. And so one of the simple messages we could take from today, from the astrology, but also what the I Ching seems to be drawing out of the astrology, is that think about the people who are really successful in life at something that they do that you admire, right? Like someone who has an incredible musical skill or talent that you admire, someone that you've studied under at college, a professor that you really liked, a parent or family member that does really good at business, or who has succeeded as a parent or in other ways in life, who's really good as a friend. You'll notice, in my opinion, you'll notice that these people are modest, that they're not people who are really, really amazingly successful at things, make it look easy. They make it look natural, right? And they don't draw attention to the fact that they make it look natural, or that they make it look easy, or they don't draw attention to the fact that they're being effortless. So it's a funny thing that real modesty, it requires that it's almost like we are hiding something from ourselves. It's a constant game with ourselves. To be modest means to be modest, but also in some ways to forget that we're trying to be modest. But we have to fake it till we make it in some ways, pushing our egos a bit out of the way and learning to be humble, to the point where we forget that we're trying to be humble and we just are humble. And so the I Ching's teaching here is really a great one for the Sun and Jupiter's conjunction, because it's saying if you want to achieve something really great and grand and big and amazing, crossing the far shore is that in the I Ching. That's that phrase, crossing the far shore. That's what it means in the I Ching. if you want to be or do something great or accomplish something great, then you have to be so modest that you're modest about your modesty. Meaning you're humble to the point where you are not even aware of the fact that you're trying to be humble. You have to hide your greatness, your grand plans, your sense of what you can or should accomplish, even from yourself. It's as though when we set off to do something great, that we have to forget the idea that it is great, or that it will be great, or that we're great, or that we can accomplish it if we just, put our heads down and work. There's something also in this statement, for example, that says, good things can't come your way when you're trying too hard for them. If you just get out of the way and let things take their own course while maintaining some very subtle intention, things have a way gradually over a long period of time of moving in the direction of destiny, and great things can be accomplished and realized when we sort of get out of the way, let our will and our agenda be there. It's not like we have no free will, we have no action or agency, but ultimately we've relinquished attachment to results, and we're humble about our humility, we're modest about our modesty, and we see what comes with an open mind and an open heart. Then, over a long period of time, gradually great things can happen. I'll never forget a story that I heard one time about someone who, it was very inspirational to me when we opened our yoga studio almost a decade ago. It was someone personal that I know who opened a business, and one of the things that they did was they just sat in the storefront of that business, even though there was no business, and they did their thing. This was this person who had a particular skill, and they just sat in that empty shop with no customers and did the skill over and over and over again. And they sat there doing their craft, and they remained committed. You remember the movie Field of Dreams? If you build it, they will come. It's not always true, right? But this was one of those stories where the person just remained dedicated to what they were doing and just kept showing up without any expectation, but they also took a risk by opening up a shop. And then gradually, over a very long period of time, where as funds started dwindling and there wasn't a lot of clientele, but they just kept that simple, unattached, non-expectant attitude. I'm just here. I'm going to serve. I'm going to do my thing. And if it takes off, great. And it doesn't, that's okay. I wanted to give it a shot. And they just kept that attitude day in and day out. They kept doing their thing. And eventually it did take off. And they've been in business ever since. So this is a friend of mine. And they were telling me this story when we were opening the yoga studio, because in the very beginning, there weren't a lot of people coming to classes. But we kept getting up every morning and doing our practice, my wife and I. We just showed up in the empty studio and just practiced. And gradually it built and it grew. My astrology practice and my wife's herbal medicine practice, same thing. Just show up, keep doing your thing, and see where it goes. You're maintaining in the background, of course, if you're honest with yourself, you're maintaining some desire, some attachment to result. You can't live without it, right? Most of us can anyway. But you're letting things evolve and grow, and you're just showing up. You're just showing up and doing what you like and hoping that things will come along, doing the smart things that you have to do to set yourself up for success, but not trying to force it. And in my experience in both astrology, yoga, my wife's herbal medicine, being an entrepreneur, this really is, in my opinion, one of the best strategies you can employ in terms of success. And the I Ching is saying the same thing. The superior person is modest about their modesty and thus may cross to the far shore. It's as though any time in life where we want to accomplish something, we have to be content to be small first. We can't be great unless we're very content with being small. We can't have authority unless we're very willing to be submissive. We can't, and to listen and to grow from other people or teachers or people who are wiser, who know more than we do. We can't recognize something of greatness unless we've experienced defeat. We can't expect results if we're not willing to show up. So Jupiter and the sun, when they come together, fill us sometimes with a vision of something great, some far shore that we want to reach, some great accomplishment or some great mission or vision or project or ideal that we want to strive for. And we may feel the enthusiasm, and the word enthusiasm means the God within, the inhabiting God within, entheos. And so we may be filled with the God within may be filling us right now with a sense of something we want to do. And yet it's important that we, in some ways, hide that vision, that we feel that inspiration within, and it's important to listen, take it in, to feel the enthusiasm, but also to find a way of not knowing it's there while allowing it to be there, not paying so much attention to it that it becomes the object of our desire, rather than it facilitating an experience, a journey. Because oftentimes, as they say, it's so much more about the journey than it is the destination anyway. So when we take a big vision into our lives, a big project, a big plan, and we allow it to develop and gestate in a humble, quiet, slowly progressing manner, we can do great things. That's the message that this particular line of the I Ching refers to. A superior person is modest about their modesty. It may cross the great water, good fortune. A dangerous enterprise, such as the crossing of a great stream, is made much more difficult if many claims and considerations have to be taken into account. On the other hand, the task is easy if it is attended to simply. Therefore, the unassuming attitude of the mind that goes with modesty fits a person to accomplish even difficult and complex undertakings. Such a person imposes no demands or stipulations, but settles matters easily and quickly. And no great claims are put forward, no resistance arises. Isn't it an interesting thing how we can have a vision and it might be great, but it's different than having a great claim, trying to claim something. We have a great vision and we allow it to dwell within us in a very simple, unassuming way, and we say we're content to see where it goes, see where it takes us. The I Ching tells us that great things happen. The second changing line of the I Ching is called eclipsing the light. And it has to do, the story of this 36th hexagram has to do with a mad king. And the mad king has taken power in a sort of an illegal manner. And as the background story goes, and the subject of the hexagram is basically a person who is like, you can imagine kind of like a person who was a part of the previous court of the good king, who's now serving the tyrant king, and obviously is now has to be loyal to a bad guy, or will lose his life. You can imagine like the movie Game of Thrones or the show Game of Thrones. You know, occasionally there's a conquering king that comes in, and suddenly they may take the previous hand of the king and employ them for their own services. Well, the previous hand of the king may not like the new tyrant king and may still be loyal to the previous king, but will die unless it serves this hand of the king will die unless he or she serves the new king or queen, right? So it's this difficult situation. In which case, one of the instructions of the 36th hexagram is to hide your light. To hide your light so that you do not attract the jealousy, the anger, and so forth of the mad king. So similarly with Sun and Jupiter, the other instruction here about the reason that we may need to hide a great plan or a great vision, or that we may need to go underground, or that we may need to do something in a way that is more subtle or strategic or careful, and not be too big and too luminous, is that there is the danger with Jupiter in its fall and Cazimi with the sun, that something about our accomplishments, or something about who or what we are, will draw negative attention from others. So sometimes, it's like, you've ever had this happen where you're having a really great day, you become just a little bit more vulnerable to someone crapping in your in your swimming pool. You know what I mean? You become a little bit more vulnerable to someone taking a swipe at you. If you walk in the house happy, you're just like, and there's anyone in the house that's feeling kind of down, they'll look at you and they'll be like, why are you happy? And then they'll try to take you down a little bit. It's human. We do it to each other. It doesn't have to be a mad king necessarily, but the main principle here of this hexagram is be careful with your greatness, because you may be infused with from the God within, the entheos, the enthusiasm, Jupiter sun. But showing that, being too brilliant about it, being too out there about it, can draw negative attention, and that can thwart your plans. Hiding the light or eclipsing the light is a hexagram that says, the saintliest people are the ones who, they have halos around them. They're glowing, right? But it's not that they're saying anything or doing anything. Sometimes the best way of being enthused, having a big plan and a big vision, is the way in which we accomplish it, not that we accomplish it. Because we grow our saintly halos around us, not so much by what we accomplish as to how we accomplish it. You can capture all sorts of goals and plans, but the ultimate goal and plan that we're trying to accomplish is to see that golden luster, that golden effulgence of love, sweetness, simplicity, kindness, compassion, patience, tolerance, goodness, truth, beauty, radiating from our very being because of how we've lived, not what we've done, not what we've achieved, but how we've done it. And so the 36th hexagram with Jupiter and the sun is also a way of saying, remember, Jupiter is invisible behind the sun. That thing which magnifies our greatness, that thing which magnifies our sense of who we are or what makes us good, is not attached to flaunting our achievements or having grand plans or grand narratives or making a big declaration on social media about what we're going to do or what our intentions for the next year are or how empowered we're becoming or whatever. But just go and do it quietly, and people will start to see the invisible, quiet, modest way that you have done things will start to be seen, because you'll be glowing. You'll be coming into your own sainthood. We do this very little by little. We're given so many lifetimes to do this. The simplest way, of course, to cultivate that sense of sainthood is also to think not so much about what can I accomplish, but how can I accomplish it? And when we think about how can I accomplish it, what we're really thinking about is, how can I do everything that I'm doing with love? How can I be a servant of the divine source, of which I am a fragmentary little spark, but still all of my actions are in service to something so grand, so big, that I can become big and grand as well. I can become a part of that splendor and that beauty just by virtue of wanting to be of service and wanting to do everything that we do in love. This is why we have to hide our big intentions in some ways from ourselves. We have to be modest about our own modesty, humble about our own humility. We have to have a goal but hide our light. We have to walk in the direction of what we think is right, just, true, and good in terms of our worldly storylines. But it's so much more about how we're doing them and whether or not we're doing them with love that is really the meaning of Jupiter's invisibility at the heart of the sun. That our greatness should be subtle, that our greatness should not be so connected to what we have done or what our intentions are. People spend a lot of time saying, around this time of year being, this is my intention. This is my set of intentions for the next year. And we kind of, I mean, it's not a sin or anything, but we sometimes flaunt them for others to see. And we think that that gives us more power to do it. But actually, it's the opposite. When we have an intention and we really mean to embody it, we keep it very quiet because we know that it's very precious and it's very vulnerable. It's like a little plant. It has a long way to grow through consistently choosing to embody that intention over and over again before it's strong enough to survive being put out for so many people to see as a big statement. This is the thing that I'm going to do or whatever. So be careful about those things. In Bhakti Yoga, I'm going to close with this today. There's a book that I really like called Free Will, Agency, and Selfhood in Indian Philosophy. Sound like fun reading. The reason that I like this so much is that it's a book that outlines different yogic scriptural views on agency, free will, and selfhood. And so it's just interesting. It's very interesting for me to read all of the variations on how yogis have thought about free will and the self. If you like philosophy, it's really cool. Anyway, the tradition that I study comes from Gaudiya Vaishnavism, and that is a form of bhakti yoga. And I wanted to read to you just this little portion that explains how the soul is understood in relation to the divine source and with free will and with regard also to free will. The Lord is a causative agent because he gives the approval for action, although he's at the same time the agent simpliciter since he is unbound by time, karma, and other constraining factors. A constraint on the self's free will and agency, however, is its past karma and the latent impressions, samskaras, with which it is born. These latent impressions create tendencies towards particular actions that are often very difficult to control, thus one's freedom is hampered. What is that saying? A few things. One is that, first of all, we all have free will. And this is just according to the Bhakti philosophy now, something I'll leave you with to consider. We have free will. We have something to do with free will. And so one of the things that comes together when the sun and Jupiter are Cazimi is the sense, remember, the life breath, the motion of the soul, and the sense of growing something, of bigness, or of wanting to embody more ennobled, bright, sort of spiritual qualities, sun, Jupiter, that it takes each of us in order to develop a spiritual set of intentions for our lifetime. It takes us, as the Yoga Sutras tell us, it takes consistency, a regular practice, without interruption over a long period of time. And as we do this, we actually, our free will increases. We get sort of more free will. Because one of the things we're working with is that so many past decisions have created present impediments to the use of free will. It's sort of a simple example is to say, if you think you're free, stop eating white sugar in your diet. You know what I mean? Or if you think you're free, cut out, I don't know what, smoking, or cut out drinking, or cut out caffeine. It's very difficult for all of us. We all have things that we're sort of hung up on. That's the simple point. And it's not that every time that we sit down to eat a sugar cookie that we have free will. Most of the time, the fact that we're sitting down to eat the sugar cookie is compulsive. It's actually, it's a demonstration of having used our free will to put ourselves into a kind of restricted and more fated dynamic. So free will is something that we have to cultivate over a long period of time. That's the first lesson of Bhakti Yoga that's been very helpful for me, and it's common to most yogic philosophies. So free will has to be cultivated over a long period of time. Consistent practice, spiritually speaking, without interruption over a long period of time, is how we start to recognize the free will that we have. And so oftentimes, one of the things that will be defeating about a Sun-Jupiter conjunction is that we feel like we know where we want to go. but we're up against the odds. Jupiter is in its fall in the sign of Capricorn. We're up against the odds. And what are the odds? The weight, Saturn, the restriction, Saturn, the necessity, Saturn, of the faith that we have built up through previous actions and choices. Just because we have the vision doesn't mean we have to, that we have the freedom to enact it, doesn't mean it's going to be easy. We may be up against the weight of past karma that's habituated us in a certain way that we have to break out of. The promising part of this is that Jupiter in Capricorn usually means a new vision that has to be cultivated over a long period of time. So it's a good time to start something that the results of which you may not see for a while, that you also have the energy right now, let's say, to be more consistent, patient over a long period of time, practicing the kinds of actions that you need to make changes that you're hoping to make. Spiritually speaking, of course, it's a great time with Jupiter and the Sun coming together to make a commitment to your spiritual life and spiritual practices and a spiritual lifestyle, such that over a long period of time, you can gradually start to see, again, that glow, that natural sense of connection to our divine source that's building within. Because as you keep practicing spirituality and life keeps going on with all of its stories, you start to realize it's so much more about how I'm doing things. Because the storylines, karmically speaking, sometimes they're in our control. So much of the time they're not, because of the idea that this isn't our first rodeo, that there's momentum behind the way that stories are playing out, not all of which is in our control, just like we don't always really have control to not take the sugar cookie. So it's patience with a long process, spiritually speaking, but also you start to realize that it's about how I'm doing things that really matters. And you have right now an uncommon kind of patience and endurance for the kinds of practices needed to make legitimate advancements in spiritual life. That's a really positive kind of inborn spiritual concept of this transit. And the I Ching is saying the same thing. Cross to the far shore is an allusion to enlightenment, an allusion to enlightenment as well. If you are modest about modesty, if you try to focus more on the way you're doing things rather than grasping towards the goal, you can do anything. Worldly goals aside, you can cross the far shore. That's enlightenment. So finally, the other thing that really helps, and you'll notice that there was this one line in here that talked about the relation that we have to our divine source. Lord is a causative agent because he gives the approval for action, although he's at the same time the agent simpliciter, since he is unbound by time, karma, and other constraining factors. Something else that really helps, I'll just use this as kind of like, did you ever see the movie Big? You know, Tom Hanks? Okay, so he goes and he wishes for something. He says, I wish I was big, you know, because I think it's like he goes to an amusement park and he can't get on a ride because he's too short and there's a girl involved, or I don't remember how the story goes, but so he goes up to Zoltar, the fortune-telling machine, puts the quarter in and says he wants to be big, and magically he's turned into Tom Hanks. He becomes big. Something that really helps us is if we consider, before making choices, before taking actions, that this realm is a bit like a wish-fulfilling Zoltar, right? That when you ask for something, but when you take an action, make a choice in the world, essentially, why are you doing so? It's coming from the fact that there's a desire behind it. And there's all sorts of desires. But there's a desire behind why we're acting in a certain way, why we're doing anything. It's natural. It's part of this world. And so when we act out of desire, we're acting because we want something. So when we make an action, we can start by saying, why am I doing this? What is the desire behind this? Like, what is motivating this action, in other words? Even that level of self-reflectiveness can help us start to purify our desires and our intentions, which then generally leads us in a better direction. But the other thing that's important to remember is that this reality is sort of like a wish-fulfilling Zoltar. When we make a choice, What we're really doing is we're putting a quarter into the machine. Ancient astrologers said this as well. This is why one of the main titles of the books in ancient astrology that you see many astrologers using is apotelismatics, which means the study of outcomes. Put the quarter in the machine because you take an action in this karmic reality, and then you get a reaction. You get an outcome, and the outcome is not exactly what you expect all the time. In fact, a lot of the time it's not. You ask for one thing, you get another thing. Because the one giving or fulfilling all desires, all requests, and all actions, the Lord of all karma, right? Zoltar, so to speak, and we say Krishna in the Bhakti Yoga tradition, is perfect. It designs the perfect outcome for the action that we take, designs the perfect result, fulfillment of our wishes and desires that will be perfectly instructive, that will always be bringing us back to the reality of love, that will be bringing us back to the reality of presence, that will be bringing us back to the reality of all that we have right now. Desire fundamentally usually comes from the feeling that we're lacking something. So when you put a quarter into the Zoltar machine of life, you're going to get some kind of action, reaction, karmic reaction, or response from reality, from the wish fulfilling tree of reality. And it really helps before taking an action if you remember that, because then you become just a little bit more careful about what you're doing, what you wish for, what you ask for, etc. When we think we're in control of everything, and we don't recognize the greater forces of the gods, who in ancient astrology, remember apotelismatics, the study of outcomes, when you were thinking about, I want to go and do this, what will the result be if I do? You would cast a chart and you'd look at the positions of the planets and you'd say, the gods are positioned in this way, and so this kind of outcome is likely. So astrology can be used in that way to strategize. I'm getting over a cold, sorry. To strategize. Is it a good idea to do this thing? Is it a not so great idea to do this thing? Some people confuse this with magic. It's not. It's just what you're doing is you're trying to understand karma. You're trying to understand action, and you're trying to understand outcomes. If people are constantly trying to manipulate it rather than learn from the response of Zoltar, so to speak, that might be more like magic. But in general, when we are not trying to manipulate forces or manipulate the gods to get what we want, we're simply approaching and saying, okay, I'm thinking about doing this, or that, and we look at the astrology, and the astrology gives us feedback. This is one of the primary, enlightened uses of astrology, is to say, how will the gods, or how does Zoltar, the cosmic reality, divine intelligence, my source, what is it thinking or reflecting back to me when I ask it about whether or not I should do this thing, or whether or not, I should walk this particular path, or what is it telling me about this particular desire? Another brilliant use for astrology. When Jupiter and the sun are conjoined, in other words, you can think very carefully, what's behind this desire, intention, action, or wish that I have right now, which I may feel very possessed by. And Theos, I might be feeling really like the God within is inspiring me to go do something, some great undertaking, and to just pause and reflect and say, why am I doing this? Or to say, look at the astrology in your birth chart, or speak with an astrologer, or whatever, even just tuning into this program. And you could just be like, yeah, even just being aware of the fact that, Zoltar might turn you into Tom Hanks. Zoltar might make you literally big because you're frustrated with being small. And do you really want that? So this kind of contemplative interaction with fate and with choice is also really, really important. We see this in the West. And again, in yoga philosophy, we say, you just remember when you act that sort of God is allowing for you to explore your desires and intentions. It doesn't mean God is going to give you exactly what you want, or that the Zoltar reality machine is going to give you the result that you think you're going to get by acting or intending in a certain way. So that can humble us. just to remember that we have agency, but that there's also this larger intelligence that's trying to bring us along and grow us in love. If we can remember that, then it makes it so much easier to stay and sort of humbly walk the course. We have some intentions, but we continually check in about them, and we allow them to be purified and changed, and sometimes completely discarded. Because there's two flip sides of the I Ching: not being humble, and shining your light way too brightly. And all of which reflects a simple lesson, which is hubris, arrogance, pride. And Jupiter and the sun's shadow together is arrogance, the bigness of ego, the bigness of intentions, not checked against, every time I choose to act in this reality, like I'm putting a quarter into Zoltar, especially when it's coming from feeling like I need something or want something that I don't have by constitution of being a divine being right now, being eternal already right now. It's hard for most of us to do that, and we have a lot of lessons to learn. There's a lot of quarters to be put in. That's part of why we're here. It's not a bad thing. It just helps to remember that there is a Zoltar machine, and there are quarters we're putting into it. And to treat it like that, just we start remembering that it's a relationship between us and the one that's generating all of these magical results from our choices, because the divine intelligence speaks back to us through those things. We try to stay, and that's astrology is here to help us become aware of the one that's speaking. This is why the Babylonians, from the Babylonians all the way through Ancient Greek Astrologers, the study of outcomes. Why do we study outcomes? Well, for this reason, to become more enlightened. And also, this is a heavenly writing. This was considered to be a heavenly script of the gods. They're in a kind of cosmic courtroom, and they are the ones that take our actions and judge them, and then give very interesting results and plot lines. And they're the ones helping shape the stagecraft of our life along with our free will. If we forget that, it's very, very difficult to cross the far shore, to accomplish the big, grand, amazing, noble thing ultimately, which is simple remembrance of who we are and the inherent infinite love that dwells within us and within all things. Not that I have any of this figured out, but that's what the I Ching inspired me to say this morning. So I hope this was useful for all of you. Thank you again to all of you for contributing to my Kickstarter. Remember, we are at, let's see, refresh. We're at 520 backers today with 4 days left to go. Stretch goal is 550. Let's see if we can get there. Remember, all my programs 50% off. Pick up a reward reading, and have yourself a great weekend. I'll probably be back again one time over the weekend to catch up on some other things, and we'll see you again soon. Take care, everyone. Bye.